Hello, all. Breach from Chthonia podcast, and this is my Monday live stream that I have become accustomed to doing now. Thank you for joining me. Right now, Instagram is still telling people that I'm here, so people I'm sure will filter in. And as always with these, I'm going to have a recording available here on Instagram of the whole live stream, which you can watch the full thing. Sometimes you can watch the full thing in posts. Other times you have to go to Reels, like hit it again and look at it in Reels so that you can see the whole thing. Sometimes posts will cut it off at a certain point. Plus I do download these and I put them on YouTube. So that is another place you can watch them if you're not watching them on your phone. So, today's topic is going to be, I think I had talked about Ancestry and the Dark Feminine as my topic for today, in addition to some stuff about faith and belief and, perhaps a little Satan thrown in there for, and that's somewhat connected to updates connected to my other channel that I have called Liminal Tarot. Because I have, those of you who are familiar with this channel know that I have a curious admixture of things. I'm an academic, and I do talk about things from that vantage point and perspective. I'm definitely somebody who's more interested in psychoanalysis and myth, which as well as religion, which is something that are not a lot of people. It's not as popular today as cognitive and neuroscientific ways of looking at things. But I feel it still has a very, very strong relevance that that we need to focus on. So that's always going to be my perspective in terms of the way that I approach myth, and I think it's actually I'm not going to turn this particular live stream into a discussion of why that is. I talk about this in my book Death and the Maiden, and I have other places where I have talked about this as well. So I have that approach, and then I also maybe because of that I use certain tools like tarot and oracle reading. I'm a Reiki therapist. I have all this other kind of stuff that I do. But some people, it's more holistic in practice, and some people connect it with things that are a little more new agey, which is not a term that I apply to myself or that I care for, because my use of these things has nothing to do with anything that is quote unquote new age. So. I have, and the reason I use a lot of these tools is because I've been using them for many, many years, like 30 plus years, and they work. For me, my experience is that, I've used them, and when I've needed them to guide me in certain situations, they've usually, probably 95% of the time have been correct, at least for me. So I have this kind of dual thing that I do, and I realize that some aspects of what I do appeal to some people and not to others. So I tend to keep that kind of stuff separate. Now, if I'm going to talk about Chthonia first, my little update on Chthonia Live, the Chthonia channel and what I'm doing both on Instagram, on YouTube, on Spreaker with the podcast. This past week, I think I had done one on Dark Goddesses, Love and the Dark Goddesses. And because it was kind of a post-Valentine's Day episode. And this week I'm probably going to look at Hildegard of Bingen. I'm going to go back to the Christian Mystics series. And for certain people here, I'm going to be covering Julian of Norwich the following week, following 2 weeks. And then I think I'm probably going to move away from that series and more into some of the other figures that I have on my master list. And honestly, I don't know if I posted the master podcast list on Instagram. I know I did on Patreon, so I have to go back and look. If I didn't, and people are interested in seeing that, then I will have to go and post it. I can always repost it on Instagram just so people can see what's on the table for the rest of the year. I don't know that I want to be take that list as a strict order, because sometimes, depending on the situation, like I ended up doing Breach for Breach's Day, and then and then I kind of jumped back and forth and around on certain topics. So so I'm kind of jumping around a bit on that list, and trying to get a lot of things together here. I feel like I'm constantly every week reinventing what I'm doing, because as I find that I'm having difficulties doing certain things, I have to adjust, because there was a time in my life when I could just work 14-hour days nonstop and get very little sleep, and this is not one of those times in my life. So I have to honor what goes on, and kind of work my way around and figure out how I'm going to fit everything in that I want to fit in. So one of the big things that I had decided on this week was that when I do my tarot videos, that I've decided to split them. I said I'm going to do half the signs one week and half the next. Because doing 12 every week, I'm like, then I just don't get anything else done. And it's not, and obviously there's work I want to do on this channel, and there's other, client work that I have to do. There's other things I need to do trying to improve my website. I'm trying to put new books out. I have a whole lot of stuff I'm trying to do right now. And I just kind of, there's been one obstacle after another. And those of you who, I think the last real post that I had was on, I want to say, was it on Wednesday? No, it had to have been on Friday. I had posted, I think it was just a photo of myself from that day, but or the day before. But I mentioned that there was a death in the family. And the death that I've mentioned, a lot of people thought it was my brother. So I want to apologize to people who said, I'm so sorry about your brother. I'm like, yeah, it wasn't my brother. It was actually, I think what I had said in the post was, people were asking about my mother. And I said, she's fine. It's her brother. And so people kind of, the small print of phones and stuff just saw brother and thought, oh, your brother passed away. Because I had even gone to lunch. I think it must have been that Wednesday. I had gone to lunch with some friends and they were like, oh, I'm so sorry about your brother. I'm like, my brothers have been dead for years. So I was just a little puzzled. Then I was like, oh, okay, I should have just said my uncle. That would have been the simplest thing to say. So I made a correction. So yeah, apologize to anybody I confused on that point, because my brother, sorry, I just said that, right? My uncle passed away on Tuesday night. He had passed away. And that was a really interesting situation, and that's kind of becoming the centerpiece of what I'm actually, and yes, I see that. Thank you very much. Hey, it's Nadine, yes. and thank you for that. Thank you on the loss of my uncle. I appreciate that. Yes, I'm just seeing that. Yes, wow, yeah, definitely a long time no speak. I'm so glad that you're able to join me today. So the topic that I had was that, because my topics usually, sometimes they have to do with things that I have been thinking about or working on during the week. Other times they have to do with questions that people have asked me. And this week is a bit of a combination of a number of things. Because the death of my uncle, first of all, the closeness of my uncle. We're close, but not close. Okay, and that's kind of the story of my family. We're close, but we're not close. I have my mother, okay, who lives about an hour from me. I have my sister who lives about a half an hour from me, and I have an aunt who lives also about an hour from me, closer to my mom. And really, I do have a series of aunts and uncles and things and cousins, and I really have nothing to do with any of them. And this was a topic, okay, so I was thinking a lot about this topic this week, because obviously when there's a death in a family, and then you go to the wake. I did not go to my uncle's funeral. I only went to his wake, and because even though I got to see my cousins, whom I've not seen in a very long time, one of my cousins I had not seen in over 20, I think I saw her at my father's funeral, and then I had not seen her for over 20 years prior. And she had said at the end of it, she's like, oh, we really all should get together. And I'm like, well, that's a nice sentiment. I already know it's not going to happen, because we have very little to do with those families. And there's sort of this mythology there of the family closeness. And so a number of things happened over the week that got me to this idea about ancestry and the dark feminine. So that's really what my topic is for today. And so I'm trying to think about where I want to begin with this, because it's a rather big topic. And some of what I'm going to say for people who know my family maybe is going to be a little bit unpopular. Maybe there's going to be people who say there's certainly I'm not going to call it a disagreement, but my sister and I were talking about the benefit of saying certain things. Because my sister is certainly more of a person who, she does get angry about things, not at me, but she does get angry about things. But she doesn't express it, like to my mother or to people who she's angry with. She'll express it to me. And we've talked about, the way in which, we keep certain things to ourselves because we feel that maybe it's not proper or it's not right to say certain things. However, part of the problem that I have is that the narrative about me or about my sister or about any of us ends up, if you don't tell people, then other people control your narrative. Now, there's always still, you could state your story and people will, if they don't want to believe you, if they want to believe other people, then that's just the way it goes. But it occurs to me that much of the gossip that goes around about me and the type of person that I am actually comes from my mother. She is sort of the central hub of everything. And there's people I know who watch this who, maybe have worked with my mother, maybe, I know I have neighbors who watch, who know my mother and everything. And they love my mother to death. And I'm not saying my mother's a bad or evil person, because she's not. I mean, she's genuinely not a bad person. But there's a lot that's gone on there that she's done in the name of a particular feminine mythology that has done damage to a lot of people, including myself. And I feel like, I think sitting there through the funeral, I'm like, okay, I think this is worth talking about. First of all, I would never talk about anybody else's story. I'll talk about my own stories. I'm not going to talk about, say, other people I know who I could compare it to. I don't, it wouldn't be my business to talk about a client's story, for instance, or a friend's story. I mean, I have to talk about mine. Okay. And because then it's my business and I can talk about it or not. But I realize probably also this may be the story that other people connect with, because I have a lot of friends who are in situations. Now, it's not going to be an identical situation to mine. We all have our own narratives. We all have our own things that we deal. We have our own wounds. Let's put it that way. We all have, and I think I had talked in the last couple of weeks about wounding and the fact that you don't avoid, to be alive, you don't avoid wounding. You get wounded, other people get wounded, and not necessarily intentionally, but there's a lot of wounding that goes on, and that is just a normal part of life that we have to sort of accept. But the question then becomes, especially when we're dealing with ancestral wounds, how do you negotiate that? And when I think about that in terms of the dark feminine, there's frequently, we think about the dark feminine as we talk about sovereignty. We talk about the kind of cynicism that may come along with that. We may talk about the way in which people feel empowered or stand up for themselves. Like, a lot of that has been part of the narrative. And part of the fear of the dark feminine has to do with being emasculated. Okay, if you're on the male side of things, there's that fear of emasculation by a woman who is either strong or very sovereign. That seems to be part of it. But one thing that came out of this narrative to me when I really started to think about it over the last few days was that the emasculation actually doesn't come from there in a lot of these cases. Certainly in my case, in the case of the story that I have here, that's not the component that goes on here, even though people, I think, fear that's kind of what it is. Okay, so what are we talking about when we talk about this narrative? Well, when my uncle passed away, if we back up a little bit to my father. My father and I were rather close, as close as we could be, because he was a man, his manners were very, he was born in America, but his manners are very English, just like his father. And they were very, the way that they often expressed affection for women was to buy them things. Like, apparently, I don't remember my father's father, because he died when I was 2, but he was somebody, from what I understand, like, he never really showed very much affection, openly. He wasn't one of those people who was like huggy, kissy, touchy, like that wasn't his way. But if my grandmother, say, was in a store and she saw something she wanted, like she walked past a jewelry store and said, oh, I really want that pair. Oh, I really like that pair of earrings. Then he'd go in and buy them for her. And my father was a quite similar type of person. He was just kind of very laid back, very mellow. And when things happened, when things occurred, he could get angry at things. And sometimes he would get really pissed off about things, but especially when he drove, he was, and when he worked on cars. I think I've talked about that before. It's actually kind of humorous. But he was not. One of the things I had learned about him when dealing with crisis in the family, especially deaths. My father was one of those people, like if something was happening or somebody was very sick or something, my mother would be like, oh, so-and-so's sick or in the hospital, this and that. And my father used to smoke pipe, and he would sit there with the pipe in his mouth. And he would listen to her. I'd take the pipe out of his mouth, and he'd listen, and he'd go, huh, it's too bad. And then he'd put the pipe back in his mouth, and he'd keep going. And I remember, as somebody who is actually surprising, what might surprise you is that I actually have a very strongly emotional nature. One that, in a very weird and paradoxical way, one that my mother has been very angry at me for and has tried to basically shame me out of. Like, that showing my emotion is a disgrace. Okay. But on the other hand, when it comes to somebody dying, somehow you're supposed to be, I guess we all go into full keening mode, which I don't do. Because when somebody dies, my feeling is, I don't see death as like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's a finality for certain people. If you're used to having somebody in your life for a long time, it's a loss. And yes, it's a loss that needs to be acknowledged and grieved, and I'm not gainsaying that, but everybody does that in a different way. And my way is not to sit there and get hysterical. If I'm crying at a funeral, it's generally not for myself. It's generally because there's somebody else who I know is just completely broken up by the loss, and it's more for them. For example, when my aunt died, my mother's sister died, she had lung cancer. She'd smoked from the time she was 11, and she knew she was going to die. But her husband, who was old, kind of old school Italian, went absolutely, like, he was like, throwing himself on the coffin and just sobbing. And it's for him. I mean, I was like, oh my God, I feel so sorry for this poor man, because I was like, how is he gonna, they had already kind of lived apart because she just couldn't take care of him. So they had moved out of their house. He had gotten a condo. He's passed away since then too. But but my aunt's daughter, her one daughter, had basically taken her into her house and put her hospital bed like in the living room. And it was one of those things where, family could come in and see her, or her grandkids were there. They would take her down, down to the shore. They would take her different places so she could enjoy her last days. Now, my mother's reaction to that was and I'm sorry, this may not be polite to say in public, but my mother said, well, if she, Debbie's probably hastened her, Debbie's her daughter, probably hastened her demise because she should have if Sophie was made to get up and take care of her husband every day, she wouldn't have died. Okay. So now you have my mother who thinks that she can defy death. Okay. She still thinks this. And she shakes her fist at it all the time because she herself is in very fragile condition, and still seems to think that if she wants to, climb ladders and drag laundry around and, drag buckets, and she, with a broken pelvis, just to prove that she's tough. I said, yeah, well, when you're crippled and end up in a home, you're really going to be happy, because my sister and I aren't going to take you in and like bathe you and feed you. Like, we're not going to do that because we're just not equipped to do it. And we're realistic about the fact that we're not. So it's, like, go ahead and push it and see how happy you are with the result, But this is a narrative that she has, and she feels that. And I remember when she had said that, and I just thought, and you know what? I mean, those were cousins also too, who I knew they knew who I was, I knew who they were, but I never had anything to do with their lives. If somebody didn't die or get married, I probably didn't see them. And I was kind of, when my mother said that, when I heard that my mother had said that, I was like, I think my cousin did the right thing. Now, my cousin also, by the way, has died. She had COVID, and she died at the age of 60. So, so it was, but she, and she, loved her mother to death, but she was, But that was what she did. And I said, well, what better way for her to go out? For her to go out, to be able to go out and enjoy things, to be able to enjoy her last moments of life with her family. Like, that's great. Why? What's wrong with that? Nothing. But my mother seemed to think, like, no, if she had been made to get up, I'm like, she had stage 4 lung cancer. Woman couldn't breathe. Like, what? It's this narrative. And that narrative is a problem. And part of the reason that, as I've said before at the beginning of this live stream, that I feel like I need to talk about it a little bit is because one thing that was really abundantly clear to me at the wake that I went to is that there is a narrative that my mother creates about not only myself and my sister, particularly me, because my sister is, she's always been kind of the good daughter, in the sense that she has been the closest to my mom. She's the one who's volunteered to be her caretaker. She is the one who gets called 12 times a day by my mother when she forgets what she did 5 minutes ago, okay? Doesn't call me. And the reason she does not call me is because, number one, I don't have children, so therefore I am selfish and uncaring. And number two, it's because she just, we don't really... There's kind of everything that I have, all the choices that I've made in life, for example, my decision that I want to travel, that I want to live overseas, that I want to do these things, has all been respun into how much I don't care about my family. And a lot of this actually started with my brother's death in 1989, when I was 17. And now, when he was sick and dying in the hospital, I was learning to drive at that point, okay? And I was taking driving lessons. And my mother was scheduling my driving lessons 4 times when they were going to the hospital to see my brother. So I'm like, why? Okay. And then later on, I sort of got, there was like these comments made about the fact, well, you didn't go to see your brother in the hospital when he was dying. I'm like, well, then why did you set appointments for me to do something at the time you were planning to go? Because, I was still not 18 yet. It wasn't like I had full autonomy of that kind of stuff. And then at the funeral, again, because I don't handle death by being hysterical, the fact, yes, somebody said classic guilt trip, yeah. Then it became, then later on, after the funeral, I remember when when his stuff was divided up among people, I never got anything. I never got any photographs. And finally I said to somebody, why do I have no photos? Because my brother and I were actually really close. And I said, why did I get none of Bill's stuff? And it was like, oh, well, you didn't care about him. And I'm like, based on what do you assume that I didn't care about him? Well, you didn't cry at the funeral. Okay, mind you, on the one hand, when I cry, it's, it's shameful. But if I don't cry, but at funerals, I guess I'm supposed to turn the waterworks on. So, yeah, so this narrative has been created, that I'm an incredibly selfish and self-serving kind of person. Now, my mother and I had a conversation when I was probably in my early 40s. And, because one of the things she always likes to do is, it's weird because her family was not the type to throw money at things, but she's kind of like that. It would be, if I was home, now I got divorced in 2003, I was technically divorced. I left my husband we split in 2001. And, and so my mother was always on this kind of thing, like, oh, I hope you have enough money. I'm like, I have several postgraduate degrees. If I can't figure out how to make a living at this point, then they're no. It's yeah, you forgot how much we have in common. Yeah. So I just did not get involved with this. So I remember there was something. There is okay. I don't want to say too much about certain other people in my family, but let's just say every family has at least one person who is who's a manipulator, shall we say? And what I found interesting was that the manipulators in our family were the ones, and there was a couple who were just a disaster. They're just their lives were I can't. And they were just literally on a collision course. Like my half brother, who was my oldest. Jenny says just one. Yeah, I had a couple of them. One of them has passed away because that was my older brother, my older half brother. He was literally the type of person I said if you bought him a house, he'd have set it on fire. He just, I don't know. He was just a walking disaster for a lot of reasons, and there were some problems between he and I. because he was, when I was married, he would call the house and ask like what my husband and I were doing in bed, like that kind of stuff. And and my mother's attitude, first of all, she says, even though my husband had said the same thing, he's like, look, he's your brother, I get it, but I don't really want him calling here. And I was like, look, dude, we're not in disagreement on this point. We're really not. But my mother's attitude was, I don't believe it happened, and he's your brother, so you need to get over it. That was her attitude. He's your brother, so you need to get over it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg there. So, so when he died, literally, I got the phone call while I was in a graduate class. I got a message from my mother. We went on break in the class. It was a 2.5-hour class. We went on break, and I listened, and I heard that he had died. My mother's, and this was my mother's stepson, and she was like all hysterical about it. And I just hung up the phone. Somebody said to me, what's going on? I said, oh, my brother just died. They're like, oh my God, are you okay? I was like, yeah, good fucking riddance. And people, that I get that's part of me being a terrible person, I guess. But my feeling is, no, I don't have to, I'm not going to cover and sanctify people just because they died when they did bad things. When they did, especially when they did things that affected me. And basically I was just told, like, you go away, this didn't happen to you. I mean, and it's not uncommon. I mean, I do hear about people telling me that this has, that they've had this kind of experience in their families. And, yes, Sister Fiction, yeah, my family's for narcissists, manipulators, and elitists. I feel you. I don't know, certainly we have the manipulators. We have the elitists. And with my mother, well, it's interesting. With my mother, it's very complex because she is, like I said, she's not a bad person. She's not an evil person. She grew up with a lot of trauma. Her mother died when she was only 9. And she saw a lot of crap in her family that went, and the thing is, we didn't know about this for years. As I've been doing some ancestry research, and the reason I'm doing ancestry research is I'm checking my eligibility for either a British or Irish passport. That's why I'm doing ancestry. My mother's side of the family, maybe not so much, because they're the Eastern European side. But she was, I was doing that, because I'm on Ancestry, there are people who will be contacting me and saying, oh, hey, so-and-so's my, they'll say something like, what was it? Oh, yeah, like there was somebody who contacted me because my mother's aunt was her grandmother. And, and apparently there's a whole story behind that aunt and everything. So then when I'd ask my mother, do you have any pictures of so-and-so or whatever? And she would say, oh yeah, but and then she's like, well, I don't like to talk about it, but, and then she would actually start to tell me things. And I am like, holy crap, woman, you have, from the time she was 9 years old, she was like trying to be the one to kind of keep the family together, because it was an absolute, it was a train wreck. It was a nuclear holocaust. I mean, the way that family was. And so I can sort of meet my mom halfway in the sense that I look at it and say, okay, you have a tremendous amount that you went through that you have not processed at all. Even at 87 years old, right? There's a whole lot here that you have not worked with. And you are not from a generation that would work with it. Like, that was not a thing that you did. So it's not even like you can say, because nowadays people grow up, it's a different dynamic. People will, there's more of the idea, for example, of people going to therapy or doing things is much more accepted now than it would have been in her day. But the way that she has sort of dealt with this is to create a narrative about family togetherness. And it's funny, I picked up a whole bunch of albums from her house because, for the research that I'm doing, I said, can I borrow these? She says, oh yeah, go ahead. So I took them home. And they're full of letters, and they're from letters from different people, from my aunt, the one whose husband just died, from different people. And it's weird because I'm reading these, I'm like, wow, these all create a narrative of closeness that isn't actually real. Because these are the same family members who are writing letters and so forth, but, like this aunt and uncle that I know lived down the street from my mom for years, and my mom would only see them once a year. at Christmas. That was the only time they would pop over with gifts and maybe sit down for coffee, and then they would leave. That's the only time she saw them. Now, once I moved out of the house, the only people who were ever invited to weddings and, different events for my cousins were my parents. We were not invited to anything. And frequently what would happen then is that my mother would say, they would ask about, just the talk that people would have. They would ask how I was doing or how my sisters were doing. And then, so who's telling the story now? My mother. Now, the problem is my mother has never known what my story is. Ever. In spite of the fact, I stopped calling her years ago. I mean, she doesn't live that far away. I call her if there's some reason to call her. And I'll probably be calling her over the next week because my sister's going to be away. So, my sister does the wellness check on her, so I will probably be calling in to do that just for a week's time. But anytime I would stop to visit my parents, my father would be sitting in the back watching OAN. And I'm like, I can't stand OAN for even 10 seconds. Okay. If you don't know what that is, that's, I think it's the One America Network. It's like Fox News on mega steroids. And I'm like, I can't sit back here and watch this. So my father would have that on because, my father and I were pretty much got along on everything, but he was very, very hardcore Republican. And which, again, years ago, maybe wasn't so much of an issue, but I think as things had started to move farther and farther to the right, it's just kind of he was just one of those people that no matter what, even though probably his own beliefs didn't really align so much with that party, he's one of those older people who it's just like, well, that's how I vote, so that's how I vote. And I don't care. I mean, you can vote however you want. I mean, I'm not, telling anybody how to vote, but it was just, that was the one thing that I couldn't. I was like, okay, if you're going to sit here and we're not, I can't have a conversation with you without this in the background, then I just can't. And my mother, I would come over because like I said, I worked a lot. Once I got divorced, I was working usually 2 or 3 jobs, 14-hour days. I was all over the place a lot of the time, and I'm by myself here, and I'm taking care of myself. So it's not, I'm not in a position to just drop everything and go over there. But I would in between sometimes try to stop in. And rather than take the time to talk to me, basically I would sit in my mother's kitchen. She would have the TV blaring, and then she'd be like, oh, excuse me, I have something to get done. And she'd be doing something totally inane, like vacuuming the basement. I'm like, you really have to do that right now? Is that urgent? And by the way, it's a concrete floor. I still don't understand why she vacuums that. But just like she used to have this thing about digging crabgrass out of the lawn. And I'm like, no, what are you doing that for? In the meantime, my father was not well. She was leaving him inside for long periods of time. So it was like, I mean, I don't know, maybe it was a stress reliever for her, but in any case, a particular thing happened at the wake where my sister and I were sitting and, and it was a very long receiving line because my uncle, he had 1 daughter and 4 sons, and they had a ton of kids. So it's like, whoosh, the kids and the grandkids were like, whoa, like a long line. And most of them I'd never met. So my cousins' spouses are looking at me like, who are you? And they're like, oh yeah, this is my cousin. And they were like, oh, okay, never met you. Yeah, how many years have they been married and they've never met me? So we did all of this. And everything was more or less fine. I mean, a lot of people there, as I expected, we weren't going to know most of the people there because we had nothing to do with the people that they socialized with and so forth. And my sister had already told her my mother was going to drive herself. And then she's like, well, I don't know. I don't want to drive at night. I'm tired, whatever. So we're like, my sister's like, look, well, then I'll drive you. But she goes, but we're only staying an hour. She says, because I need to get home before it gets too dark. My sister is not great at driving in the dark, and it's a long drive back. And she drops me off on the way. So, and the only reason she said she felt comfortable is because I was with her, so I could, direct her to places where she maybe couldn't see as well at night. So, we're there, and my mother finally says, okay, I'm going to go with you guys. So it's going to be an hour. That's it. And so she's, my cousin comes and sits my mother in the front, and my mother's sister, they're the only 2 left. So they sat in the front. And my sister and I went and paid our respects, and we sat there, and we were looking at, photos and stuff in the back and everything. And then some people that we knew came in, so we were sitting up front talking with them. And so then we were sitting behind my mother, and then it was like getting to be time. Like the place was starting to, the crowds of people that we knew had all left. And I was like, okay, it's pretty much time to go. So my mother was putting her coat on, and I said, are you getting ready to leave? She goes, no, I'm just putting my coat on. And I said, well, it's been an hour. And, and plus I could hear the people in the funeral parlor kind of saying like, wow, there's all these people who are staying a long time and there's not a lot of parking there. So they with a wake, you kind of just move through, right? So, so I was like, yeah, I think they want to free up for the people who are coming in the next shift and so forth, because they were having it was a long time. It was like 4 to 8 or something like that. So she goes over to my aunt, and she goes, and my sister and I are sitting there, and she goes, oh, well, I'm going to have to leave, because they, have something else they want to do. And she says it just in that tone of voice, they, I want to stay and do the right thing, but, they have to go. And it was like that way. She had done this to my sister too when my cousin died. That was during COVID. And my mother wanted to go to the viewing, and this same aunt had told her, she's like, no, your husband is sick, don't go, you don't want to expose him to COVID, you don't want to expose yourself to COVID. And because my father was going to dialysis then, and my sister and her husband were living with my parents at the time, and they were going to take him to dialysis while my mother went to this wake. And so she decided, no, it's probably health-wise, probably not a good reason to go. So what does she do? She calls up my cousin, the husband, and instead of saying, I don't want to, I'm worried, I don't want my father was sick. She didn't, instead of saying that, she says to him, well, I have no one to take Bill to dialysis now, so I just can't go. In other words, like my sister and her husband are there, but now have refused to help her, so she has to do it herself. Okay. You see what I'm saying? And when I went to England, people know I went to England, and I had a nervous breakdown in 2019. I'm just going to say it. Yeah, I had a nervous breakdown in 2019. I'm not going to get into all the details of why that happened. But after that was when I started having problems with driving. And it was very, very difficult. I mean, I fought to get to work every day. I was doing crazy things like, leaving at 3 a.m. because nobody else would be on the road. It was just awful. And when COVID hit, I mean, as horrible as COVID was, the fact that I didn't have to drive anywhere was kind of great. Okay. So because I had a year and a half to kind of, in fact, there was nobody on the road, and you really only were going to, going to the grocery store or the pharmacy or whatever. Like, that was good for me in that respect. I was like, okay. And I could work from home. So I had a lot of recovery during that time. But then when we suddenly had to go back to work, 4 days in, I had, I think within the 4th day, I had another driving breakdown. And I just said, okay. That's when I made a decision to quit my job and do this kind of stuff full time, because I said, I just can't. I cannot drive to a 9-to-5 job every day. Like, my body just will not allow it. So, as part of that recovery, I was like, okay, I'm going to go overseas because I just need to get away from here. Because weirdly, now I remember when I first time I ever went to University of Reading, when I was back, when I was an undergraduate, I did study abroad there. And I remember being told by the study abroad officer, and my English friends are just going to love this, but it was just, well, you'll make friends with people from other countries, but not the English, because they're all very cold. Which was the hilarious thing that I was told by an Argentinian head of the department. And of course, what's hilarious is that I have lots of English friends. And that's one thing I really realized when I went over, and I was in England for 3 months and then in Ireland for 2 months. When I was in England, I was like going somewhere every weekend to see somebody that I knew. And I was like, I know a lot of people. And by the end of the trip, okay, by the time I left Ireland, I had a lot of stuff had happened, and again, this is not to talk about all that stuff, but when I came back, I was like a different person. And when I came home, my driving was great. I was in good shape for about 6 weeks until I had to actually buy the car, because something in me just doesn't want to be here. Yeah. She's laughing and chuckles in British. Yes, I know you've, that was the thing. So I just said, that's where I feel more at home. Okay. So anyway, a lot of the reason I went, I was researching a book at that time. That's why I was there. But also, it was a time of recovery for me. I'm starting over, and I'm like, okay, I'm taking some time out. I'm taking savings. I'm going to go over, and I need to figure things out. And it was great. It was like exactly what I needed. My father was sick, though, and I did talk to my father before I left. And my father was still alive when I got back, by the way. But the narrative that went on while I wasn't at home was Bridge went overseas, and she's abandoning her father because she's selfish. She wants to have this long vacation, so she's abandoned her father. And when I came home, a lot of people, including the same aunt and uncle, when I saw them, they just gave me this. They wouldn't even say hello to me. They just gave me a dirty look and like turned away, like, I was the worst person in the world because I had just abandoned my mother and father at their time of need. Okay? So yeah, I guess I'm just a tad resentful of all this. But what does this have to do with the dark feminine? And the thing is, my sister was supportive of me. She was just, and when my aunt, apparently, because she's the one who told me that my mother had said that to my aunt. And when my aunt said, well, I can't believe, and she says, do you even understand why she went over there? Like, because again, the story is not, nobody ever asks me. The narrative is being filtered through the mother. And the mother is already living a narrative that I talk about as the victim, savior, martyr trifecta. Because of what she's been through, she feels it's her job to fix and save everybody. And I don't like that. That was a fight I had with her in my 40s, as I said, because when she started with the, I want to give you money. I said, look, your money is for you and daddy. Okay, you guys, not only just for your medical needs or whatever, but also if you want to travel, you want to go see your grandkids, you want to do things, that's your money. You shouldn't be giving that money away to other siblings and to other people. Like, that's your money. And your adult children shouldn't be siphoning off of you. Like, we're grown-ups. We should be able to figure it out. And I said to her, Mom, I want an adult relationship with you. We all go through things in life. We go through changes. As I started to go through menopause and things like that, it was like, yeah, I want, I'd love to have mom's advice on those kinds of things, right? My mother's response when I told her that was, how dare you? How dare you say that to me? Because to her, I was going to be a child. And when my father was sick, I was also, my blood was boiling at that too, because she treated him like he was an infant. This is a grown-ass man who was in the Air Force, okay? He was like, he was a strong guy. He was a mechanic. He was a guy's guy. He didn't want somebody hanging over him like this. It literally made like the steam come out of my ears, because I know my father he didn't like that kind of stuff. She denied him pain meds because, if he's on morphine, he might not be able to talk to me. I'm like, is this about you? Is this about you? Who's this about here? Is this about you? And if you call her out on that kind of stuff, she'll say, oh no, if she says something that hurts my feelings and I say to her, Mom, you said this and I never said that to you. You're just making things up. You're just being this again, And she does the same thing to my sister. And I always thought, for me, but at that time that I told her that, when she said, how dare you, that's when she said to me, you don't love anybody because you never had children. Okay. So let's back up with the dark feminine narrative here. Dark feminine has a lot to do with sovereignty. Okay. And I feel like this is like the way I see this narrative and the way I've seen it in the lives of others is there's direct opposition to sovereignty here. If you are your own person, because I looked at all of this, and once I figured out years ago that not only was I already branded somehow the uncaring one for wanting to do my own thing and not wanting to have kids, okay? A lot of people don't have kids, it's just, and that, that's an important choice. If you want to have kids, if you want to have kids, then you should, then great, if you have, if that's what you want. But, and it's, just popping in to say hello. I had, so I just had this thing of, so she said that. But then again, with my sister, who did all the things, like she had 2 kids and she has grandkids now, and she stayed married all these years. She's also, when she stayed with my mother to help her out with things, all my mother talked about, everybody was like, oh, she's here and now I have to take care of her too. Like my sister would sit down to read a book and it would be like, oh, you have time to read. And it's like, what? Well, you're just spending your time running around doing dumb shit. And But she has this kind of thing that she's kind of like she's Jesus Christ or something, And my brother, who had died years ago, referred to her as Martyr Mary back then, and that's kind of what it is. And it's really funny because she is so oppositional to death. She is determined that if you just work hard enough, you will be immortal, which I think is hilarious. And so there's just this whole narrative that goes on here. And what it's done is it's made her the hub, and the rest of us are all on the periphery now, because we only exist in relationship to her in the family dynamic. And because, we don't participate in that, therefore we don't exist at all. If people ask her, oh, so what is Bridges doing? She might tell them that I have a doctorate in what she has no clue. What I do, she has no clue. I was shocked when my father died and she actually wanted to read some of my books. I was like, do you? And she did read one of them. But she doesn't know anything about me. Whenever, during that period of time, if I dated anybody, she wasn't interested in knowing. She just wasn't interested in knowing anything. If I would come home from a long trip, typically when people sit around the table and stuff, people talk about like what's going on in their families. If I talked about my own travels, I was immediately cut off and the subject was changed because nobody was interested. And so I live on the periphery of my family, and kind of being out on that periphery is how I've kind of existed. And so I think that my relationship to the feminine, first of all, I very much value sovereignty, because to me, and ironically, my mother is somebody who said, don't, when I was growing up, she says, don't rely on a man, because there was a lot of abusive men in her family. She's like, don't rely on a man. You need to be able to take care of yourself. So now I'm able to take care of myself. And somehow now the people who she really gravitates to are the ones who she feels she has to throw money at, or that she has to cuddle or take care of as grown-ass people. Okay? It's like, and it probably with the death of my brother, like some switch flipped or something. But, and again, I'm trying to be sensitive to the fact that she has these issues. And I still help take care of my mom because I don't want to leave all of it to my sister. But at the same time, I also don't feel a particular allegiance there, because I just feel like I've already been dismissed as the young guy. I'm like, okay, well, so my attitude is, fuck it. I'm going to live my life the way I want to live it. And if other people, have something to say about it, well, F you. I mean, I don't care. I live life the way I want to. But that was one of the things that I'd found that I didn't like in the way she treated my father. I said, you're not treating him like a grown man. You're infantilizing everybody. And that is part of her, kind of all-mother kind of fantasy. And it's really weird, because one of the things that my sister tells me is that when I do go over my mother's house, she apparently gives my sister a bad time about a lot of things. When I come over, my mother is better behaved, which is weird. Because when my mother does things and then starts in with this hurts and that hurts, I'm like, well, you're the dumbass who's dragging stuff upstairs. I don't know what you're doing. I mean, I'll tell her that. My sister will keep her mouth shut. I don't. And any of you who are interested in the astrology there, my birthday's April 20th and my mother's is April 21st. So go figure that. Go to Aries Taurus. Go figure that one out. So it's not that I don't love my mother, but this is, and I'm trying to put it into context, but I'm also not going to live out the same trauma. And I think the reason that I liken this to the dark feminine, I think a lot of people deal with this, where they deal with these narratives about you and who you're supposed to be as a woman and what it is you're supposed to be doing with your life and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. When I was down in Southampton, I was down with a couple of friends, and one of them is this wonderful woman I know. Her name's Rhiannon, and she is she's actually a deacon in the Church of England. But she came and met with me and another friend, and we were down having drinks in Southampton, and she says, and she's asking me about all the stuff that I'm doing, and she's like, oh my God, you've done this, like you've wrote all these books, you've done this, you've done that. And, she goes, isn't your mother must be so proud of you? And I just laughed. I was like, no. I said, I'm just the horrible person who's in England while my father is sick, which he's been for 10 years, and which I'm not allowed to do anything to intervene in any way, by the way. It wasn't like I was allowed. She was the only one who was allowed to care for him. So it's not like I could be there to care for him, because I wasn't allowed. So And he was also at a point where he didn't really know who anybody was either. So I was like, and weirdly was my uncle, who just died, had said, he had saw what happened to my father. And my uncle was a Navy guy. He was, one of those, and he, and it's funny because some of the letters that I read, he had a real contentious relationship with his father too. But, and I feel like there was a lot in that family. Like when my mother's father was dying and she had to put him in a nursing facility, she got calls from his brother telling her what a horrible, selfish bitch she was. So my mother's put up with her fair share of stuff, but she's internalized a lot of it, and then she's projected a lot of it outward. So, but I just said, well, I'm not taking any of that on. But it does remind me that, so dark feminine, a lot of that are people who kind of end up being on the periphery. You're not in that perfect family situation. Because honestly, I don't know that even really exists. There's some people, who have reasonably good family relations, and that's cool. I mean, I'm happy for people who do. But I think a lot of people don't, even if they want to portray that they do. And there's been this image that she wants to keep up. And I find that when I encounter people in her life, they all kind of look at me with this kind of jaundiced eye, like, oh, you're that one, And I'm like, what's been said about me? Because these people don't even know me, And, so, and, like, even her neighbors and the people around her, and that's all they all portray her, like, oh, she's such a wonderful person. I'm like, I mean, and again, it's not that she doesn't have her traits that are good, but at the same time, a lot of what she has done, because she's not dealt with this past narrative, is she's, I mean, we are simply not a together family. Both of my brothers are gone. There's a lot of trauma around both of those as well. We have one sister who we don't talk to at all. And I'm not going to get off on that tangent, but it's basically my one sister and I out of 5 of us. And, and that's, and then there's my one aunt who also kind of gets left dangling on the edge because she has mental challenges. So she's kind of been left dangling on the edge, and that's pretty much it. And my mom, it's like, I don't care to call over there because I don't want to be infantilized. I mean, it comes back to the idea that now, and even my sister's 60 years old and she gets treated like, she says, because why am I being treated like I'm like 10? I'm like, welcome to my world. And this is just how it is. But so to me, I always feel like this is that hard thing of, I don't know. Okay, for one thing, I just feel like it's important to talk about certain narratives, like I said early on, because I think that when we don't talk about them, that other people get to define who you are. Like if somebody went back one day to write your biography, okay, and you asked somebody in my family who didn't know me, who was like a cousin or something, the version they'd have of me wouldn't resemble me at all, because they don't know me. They just don't. They only know the version that has been put through that filter, and that filter is, let's just say it's inaccurate, okay? It's not, it doesn't really say who you are. And so I don't know. There's times when sometimes I think I just feel like I needed to say, like, okay, no, this is actually what I am, and I'm not. And it's funny because the people who are my friends will say to me, like, I'll say to them, when I talk about myself as being this selfish, uncaring person, they all think that's hilarious because they're like, they don't know you, do they? I was like, no, I'm actually, I feel like I'm kind of the type of person who, I have my own boundaries and my own space, and I respect other people's boundaries too. I can talk a lot, but I can also listen, and I'm interested in people and what's going on with them and what they have to say. And, to the point that they want you to, and, people want you involved to a point, and then sometimes people want you to butt out and they want to deal with their own things. But, I'm also, I also feel like sometimes when, and maybe some people on here who can relate to these experiences could say, sometimes when you have a very loud voice when things, and you feel like, you have to talk over, because you feel like you have to talk over people to be heard, because people don't hear you. People don't hear you. They want you to be quiet. They're not interested in what you have to say. And as soon as you start talking, they change the subject. so that's kind of been my consistent life experience in my family. So I'm like, okay, you know what? If you guys aren't interested in me and what I have to say, fine. Then I'm going to go talk to people who are interested in what I'm doing. And I don't know. I suppose another response to that would be that I could have just fallen in line with what the family narrative was. But, yeah, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just like, I can't. I can't do that and be true to myself. That was one thing my dad had always said to me, because the one thing I missed about him was that he would always say, because there would be certain things I would do, my mom would be like, well, your father is not going to like that you did that. And I talked to my father about it, and he's like, I don't care. He's like, it's your life, do what you want. He just didn't care. It was just like, well, not that he didn't care. He didn't, it was, whatever I decided to do, whatever, I changed my name, whatever I did, he was just like, yeah, do what you want. He's like, you got to live with yourself. You got to be happy. So he's like, do what makes you happy. And that was always the way he was. Do what makes you happy. And, when my uncle, I think when he had seen what my father had gone through, because my father was sick for 10 years, and I think his life was extended, when my sister and I, we were like well past the sell-by date. I know that sounds absolutely horrible, but literally it was at a point where it just angered me, because I'm like, this man needs to be on palliative care, and my mother just refused. Oh, I'm giving him Tylenol. Tylenol's not going to help with that kind of pain, okay? She just like tortured him. She like extended his pain because she wanted to have him there, so to treat like he was 6 months old again or something, And my uncle, the one who had just died, had actually called my mother up and told her she was being selfish, because he was horrified. And I think the reason he passed very quickly, he was diagnosed with lymphoma last month, and I think one of the reasons, I think, I don't know. As much as anybody has control over their own passing, but I know he told my aunt, like, I will not go through. He would not going to go through what my father went through, which he says, you're not going to put me through that. And I don't think my aunt would have done that to him, but it was interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. And, but it's interesting how my mother, who's probably more the representation of that aspect of feminine or feminine role that is more proper or more approved, or, the saintly role, is actually the one who's probably doing more damage. So when I talk about, needing a dose of the dark feminine, it's like, when are you going to get real about sovereignty and what it means to be alive, and what it means to, what does it mean to be yourself? Like, what does it mean to be whoever you are, like whatever it is you decide to do with your life. This is not a time where, like, when I grew up, there was the expectation that you were going to, Jenny says, see the truth there. Yeah. There's a, at what point in your life do you, when I grew up in the 70s, okay, I think that's where I was going with this, there was the expectation almost that you wouldn't get married and have a family. Like, that was just, it was just literally like a foregone. I remember even saying, well, one day when you get married and have a family of your own. Like, that was always just the assumption. And nowadays people don't make that assumption, which I think is great. You shouldn't make that assumption, because that's not for everybody. And, there's a lot of reasons why people don't want to do that. And I've often said, that's a big commitment. If you want to do that, if that's the legacy you want to leave the world as a child, then that's a big commitment. And not everybody can do it. Okay. And for me, I said, no, my legacy is in other stuff. My legacy is in teaching and writing and other stuff that I'm doing. I don't need to create a being to be a legacy. I've never had a desire for it. And, so it's a different thing. And, but at the same time, I always feel like when you're out on the edge like that, it's like, yeah, actually, I do want to have a tribe that I belong to. I actually do want to belong to a group of people. It's not like, I think a lot of people think, oh, well, you just enjoy being away from everybody. And it's like, well, no, not necessarily. I do like having my tribe, but it's just, I'm not finding it within my blood ancestors for the most part. That's not where it is. And I think that's true for a lot of people. Yes, you said, Nadine saying, yeah, for women, we have to make the choice because we're on a time limit. Certainly, yes, if you're looking to have a child. I'm past I'm past my date. I can't have children at this point, and that's fine. I'm actually, with the way laws are changing in the U.S., which is all another subject, I'm really kind of glad that I'm past that time and don't have to deal with those kinds of issues. Yeah, so the people in my family who look at me kind of like with horror because I don't want to, or, you know, I'm like, I can't, I'm not, I resent the notion that I'm selfish because the family that's already kind of told me that what I do is not interesting to them and who I am is not interesting to them unless I was doing the thing that they wanted. And that still might not be interesting to them, or unless I play into a certain narrative. And I just said, well, no, I'm not going to do that. So, you know, so that's kind of disenfranchised me from a whole lot of people who kind of look at me with suspicion, or look at me like I'm a crazy person, or look at me like, and I'm like, well, that's the dark, that's part of it there. You're on the periphery there, and, you know, because you're doing things as they are, and you're saying things as they are. Because that's the other thing that I have. You know, I will frequently say things, what's on my mind, and, you know, and there's people who will say, well, you know, you shouldn't say that. Well, I just did. I just said it. So deal with it. Yeah, it's yeah. So sorry, I feel like this live stream's a little more diffuse than some of the other ones, but yeah, it's a subject that kind of came up this week, and one other thing I just want to say before I go, because we're at the hour here. But on the subject, I think I talked about faith and belief, because that was another topic that had been kind of in my mind, and actually for completely different reasons that were unrelated to family. But one of the things that my mother always does is she's like, you know, she thinks she can pray everything away. And I said, well, gee, that's not how it works. You know, I said to my sister the other day, because my mother's always like, well, you know, I'm like, she does all these risky things. She's like, well, I just pray, and I want to, you know, she prays to win the lottery. She prays for all kinds of stuff. And I was like, maybe she needs to sacrifice a couple chickens in the backyard. I mean, she's not, you know, she's not really given anything in return for those prayers. It was, you know, she always kind of does that. She always talks about her faith. I'm like, yeah, but you won't let people go. You're afraid of death. You don't let people go when it's time. I mean, we're not, you know. And I said, well, you know, if you have faith, don't you have faith that person, you know, is going to be taken care of, that they're going to a better place, or, you know, that, I mean, that's the narrative there, right? But apparently you're so terrified of this that I don't know. I mean, what do you mean? You know, do you have faith? And that was another thing that she got mad at me for once, because I said to her, faith is about believing, you know, accepting the truth no matter what it turns out to be. Okay? You know, faith is not about, but, you know, it's not, belief is kind of like saying belief is that how would I read it? It says that the truth is what we insist that it is, you know, is what we want it to be. You know, I believe it's going to be this. And faith is saying you accept whatever it is. You accept that things are going to be okay no matter what the truth is. And my mother got very angry at me for that too. So I guess, you know, everything I say is wrong, but it's just weird, this weird dynamic here. And I feel like that's kind of fueled a lot of the work that I've done, because, or the exploration of it, because I'm saying, you know, what exactly is going on here? And when women try to, or when we try to step into this, into these other roles, or also when I that are outside of the convention, and also just thinking about the feminine as something that's betrayed. Okay, because that's a theme. Like if you read a lot of my novels, that's a lot of the theme. A lot of the theme there is one of betrayal. Now maybe they're not specific stories to my life, but betrayal seems to be a big thing that I connect with, and the idea that the people who are closest to you are the ones who, you know, who give you the shaft. And so yeah, and that's about, you know, sort of grappling with that energy, sort of, you know, fighting where you need to fight and yielding where you need to yield, and but ultimately being just sort of ferociously very truthful. It does also get into the subject that I have of the way that when these, this is another topic, a separate topic, which I'm not going to get into now, but I've alluded to it a little bit, like these Apollonian, like beings of light, gods of light, and the way in which gods of light actually can become very controlling and very authoritarian. And you need a dose of that, you need a dose of that other, non-light energy to kind of come in and balance that out, or be the antidote to that, or at least bring you back to that place of, reconnecting to the world and reconnecting to truth. Jenny says balance. I would say balance, and I would also say integration. From an alchemical standpoint, from a tantric standpoint, it's the idea that you are integrating, you are taking the crap and you are doing something with it, and you are transmuting it into something that is useful to yourself, and that is going to transform you. And so it's difficult work, but this is, in addition to everything I've kind of studied in my life, and the years and years of study that I've done on many of these subjects, both in religious studies and psychology, in myth, and all the things that I've done. Yes, okay, yes, we're long overdue for a catch-up. Yes, I will have to hit you up, Nadine, so thank you for checking in. I just feel like that, in addition to a lot of what's gone on in my life, has kind of colored the way that I view things. So, So anyway, thanks for listening to this a little bit more personal live stream, but I do feel it's a subject worth talking about, because even though this is my experience, I know from talking to people that there's other people who have very, very similar experiences, as some people have indicated in the live chat here. And many of us who look to that kind of a path, it's because, when you follow the traditional path doesn't really lead you anywhere except to a very inauthentic place. But oftentimes it does mean there's a separation there, like you're giving up an awful lot in terms of connection that you could offer, and that really, could be good in a family situation. It takes all different kinds of people. Everybody can't be the same, be doing the same thing, thinking the same thing. But instead, because, at least in my case, because there's an insistence on a perfect narrative, that because of their insistence on it, that therefore the voices are not heard. And I feel like a lot of women who are kind of going over to this, who are kind of going over to this more dark feminine stream, it's because they feel disenfranchised by the normal, or because you have a voice that's not heard. And I think that's also why I'm very big on being able to kind of say what you want to say. I mean, yeah, obviously not wanting to trigger other people and their stuff, but I think that's also why, and that's why a lot of times I write stuff comes out as very, very, very violent, it almost, not because I live a really particularly violent life, but because that's the way the pent-up emotion kind of expresses itself. And I just find that that's the safest way to express it, rather than, I mean, when I was married, I was doing martial arts, because I was like, I'd get the aggression out somewhere. But, so anyway, thank you. I mean, so I'm seeing in here, yes, a very relatable stream, very relatable, nodding your head the whole time. So yeah, I'm glad that this was a relatable stream. A little less lecture-y, I suppose, than some of my usual thing, but that's my kind of didactic, teacher energy that I have. But, so anyway, thanks for letting me share all this, today. And I do hope it's something to think about. And obviously people feel free to comment or reach out. I'm always happy to have conversations with people about this kind of stuff. And this is kind of part of the coaching practice that I have with people as well, working through changes, because a lot of times it's very hard to get outside of narratives. We feel like, well, yeah, I would make a change, but I'm afraid mom's going to think this, or I'm afraid this one's going to think that. And at some point it's just like, you know what? They'll think what they're going to think. Haters going to hate. I mean, hate's a strong word. They probably don't hate, but it's just like, they, you don't like something I'm doing? Oh, well, this is how I am. And, the kind of thing that makes you happy or the kind of life that you want is not the kind of life that I want to live. So, me, it's not that I wouldn't mind necessarily being married again or whatever, but I'm not, but if I don't, then I don't. I mean, it's, I just feel like being true to myself is the most important thing. And I think for a lot of women that they need to feel that, especially if they've been made to feel like somehow they're not doing their part, or they're not doing the right thing by not acceding to some kind of a tradition or some kind of a norm. Anyway, lots to think about there. Thank you guys so much for and Tish saying yes. Please don't do how other women tear each other down. Oh yeah, that is a whole other topic. So yeah, I can think about that one in the future. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this week, and we'll see you next week.